Special session of the Edmonds School District Board of Directors is now called to order, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Meyer.
Well, thank you. As promised, we're excited to share with you progress that's been made so far in the grading practices work and task force, and get feedback and hear what our next steps are. So I'm going to turn it right over to Dave.
Thank you so much, Dr. Meyer, and thank you, Board, for being here and joining us over Zoom, even from very long places.
Let me check. Tom, can you hear okay?
Yes, I can hear fine.
Okay, good.
Perfect. So this is the grading practices study session, and before we there you go. Clicking on the see that please. Since some of that is blocked, I'll go ahead and read the land acknowledgement today. We acknowledge the original inhabitants of this place, the Snohomish people and their successors, the Aillaud tribes, who since time immemorial have taken care of, hunted, fished, and gathered on these lands. We respect their sovereignty, their right to self-determination, and we honor their sacred spiritual connection with the land and water. By acknowledging these homelands, we commit to working with tribal nations to further the education aims they have identified in our classrooms. It's just not only to click forward. Okay. So for the study session objectives today, basically the purpose of this session is to update you all on where we are in implementing the pieces of the resolution that were passed in November. I want to take the opportunity during this session to re-ground ourselves a little bit in the why and the why of this work and what's been communicated to teachers and those who are on the task force. And then I want just to have a mutual understanding of where we are with the implementation itself and the progress we've made, and that includes the survey that went out to building administrators, the teacher survey, the partnership that I've been forming and maintaining with the EEA, just developing a general plan for the resolution, which I've brought a physical copy of as well, so we can take a look at that today. How we went about scheduling the task force meetings, putting together the task force itself, how the first meeting went, and then ways that we'll be communicating this out with schools throughout the whole process. I want to just summarize the events and outcomes of the first task force meeting, which happened a couple weeks ago, and then review next steps with you. And so we'll ground ourselves a little bit in the why. And yeah, it gets a little bit black. So I'll go ahead and read this aloud. I like this quote. We must help students and their parents understand that grades do not reflect who you are as a learner, but where you are in your learning journey, and where is always temporary. Knowing where you are is essential to improvement. Informed judgments from teachers about the quality of students' performance can help students become more thoughtful judges of their own work. And this is one of the quotes that I shared with teachers during the first meeting as they started working on thinking about what the purpose of grading actually is to them, and we worked through that, those exercises. So I think another reason that we really need to think about our grading practices as a system in general is that we're failing a lot of kids in our classes. And I think this slide illustrates some of the courses, and these are core courses, where we have our highest percentages of Fs and Cs. And I don't know how, you may or may not be able to see that, but these are percentages from the first quarter, so that's of this school year of 24-25. And they do not reflect middle school credit card courses. And that is an important distinction. So when we take a look at Algebra 1, the earliest grade level that's representing would be 9th grade. So some 7th and 8th graders take Algebra 1, and if they were included in this data, the failure rate would be lower. So to consider. But regardless of that, the idea that 1 in 3 of the kids who take Algebra 1 are failing is alarming. And we need to look into why and what could possibly be causing that. And that's just another highlighted reason of why we get into doing this work.
I'm curious how the teachers on the committee reacted to this data.
This will be something I'll share with the teachers on the task force at the
Okay,
next
so
meeting.
they didn't see it, because when I saw it, when I was going through the slides, it's appalling. Now, I understand Algebra 1 and even geometry here, although, so if a student's, the really high achieving kids take algebra in 7th grade still, right?
That's correct.
And geometry in 8th grade,
Yes.
so they wouldn't be included here, although that number's. But even that being said, Algebra 2 is all the kids, I mean, there are no, hardly any, middle schoolers. That means 24%, that means 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4 kids is failing Algebra 2 as a 9th grader. And Washington State history, to me, these are appalling numbers, and I hope the teachers sort of feel that way too.
I'd be curious to know how many zeros are included
Yeah.
in the grading for those kids.
So, Rebecca, I had asked, and I don't know if it's even possible, because we haven't followed up together on this, but to find out if there's a way to know how many of the Fs that we have are from teachers.
Craig did a random sampling. We haven't looked at examined the line of every student who received an F in every class. That would obviously be a massive undertaking, but Craig did a random sampling. Did you for us, yeah.
Yeah, it was really more about looking at the different ways that teachers set up their grade books. And I think the random sampling was, I looked at about 15 different teachers that I knew. And I think I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say I probably saw, 10 different ways the grades were calculated.
Out of 15.
Out of 15 grade levels, so, yeah.
But there, I don't know, from my having worked here, I don't think we had the functionality, I don't know if we do now, to actually identify, like, without having to go teacher by teacher, which teachers that use the 100-point scale, how many kids from there
Yeah, I see what you're
versus
saying.
teachers who don't use
Yeah.
that, to see how many Fs from the one
Yeah.
set of teachers versus the other set of teachers.
I don't know the answer to that question today, but I'm certainly happy to talk with our cumulative guy and see if there's a way we can.
If there would be a way electronically to
Yeah.
do that, I
Yeah.
think that's the kind
I'll
of
see what I can do.
data that would be extremely compelling. I would think compelling, certainly enlightening.
Yeah.
I know when I was in the data office, I don't think we had a way to
Yeah.
do that,
Yeah,
but
I
maybe
think-
I'm hoping there is now.
Yeah, cumulative has some more functionality. so
Yeah,
certainly
I mean, that would be really great. I don't think homeroom has that functionality. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and just, we'll definitely look into it, but, the tech systems do in some ways limit our ability
Yeah.
to dial that deeply down, but I think it is something that we need to look into. So what's entirely possible when we start looking into this is we'll get a sample, but not necessarily the whole, if that makes sense.
As long as we could get a representative sample, although, I don't know where, if we could get a sample, I'm thinking just have, as many as we can of each type, because teachers are teachers, right? I mean, it's not like they need to be demographically represented for any reason. Maybe student-wise, do you know what I mean? They're students. If they're an AP or an honors class, it's gonna be different, because those kids are gonna jump through every hoop, or more likely than not. So I guess student demographics might sort of help to, say, be careful in terms of the samples on that variable.
And I'm very curious about it too, and I think it would make a compelling case for the group to examine it.
Yeah, because there are clearly, based on the comments, people who don't see the line from inaccurate grading to lack of graduation.
The other thing, we talked about this, we had a chance to the percentage, of course, is an average of teachers that were failing kids. So there are some teachers that have a much higher fail rate than others.
Yeah,
And I'm hoping that principals are able to have those conversations with those teachers and saying, so you've got 50% of your kids failing math or failing algebra. That means either you're a really bad teacher or you are a really harsh grader.
are those conversations happening with the principals?
We're having that conversation at our next principal learning network at Mount Lake Terrace High School at the end of this month, because we have all this data.
We'll have all the grade data and now to look at.
And they're gonna be looking at each other's fail rates and creating next steps. So it's all of our comprehensive and secondaries.
Because one of the things we used to do is just as grades came out, Greg will remember this, Lynn Calkins would lead the principals through a homeroom exercise, and where she took them step by step so they could right then and there, without having to work, pull out their failure data by teacher, by subject, and be able to then look at it right then. So they were being taught, reminded how to go about getting that data.
Yeah, Allison Schauber, we set that up already with principals, so they all have templates that be able to, so we did in November at quarter grades, we set it up for them so they could go in and get their grades and pull their data out and then slice it in the different ways that they needed to. So we'll go back to revisiting that at our PLN meeting.
And making sure that
Making sure
they've
they
done that, and that they're following up with their teachers, I would hope.
Yeah, and we'll be focusing on ninth grade for this PLN, and also Allison will provide data that shows, what about how many Fs are these kids getting? Is it everything else is okay and they've got one F?
Yeah,
So that's what we're gonna be
Yeah.
looking at as well, at the principal learning network.
yeah, okay, good.
Thank you. So I just wanted to go ahead and talk through the actual steps of the implementation process, because a lot's gone into this, and I think it's worth highlighting all of the steps that we've taken so far, and then eventually that'll lead into where we're going next. So this slide kind of summarizes all of it, and then I'll get into some more specific details. But since the fall, since the resolution was passed, we've surveyed principals to get their perspective on the grading practices that they see within their own schools. I've had multiple meetings with the Professional Excellence Committee, which is a group of administrators and EEA members, and we come to discuss that are happenings within the district and the direction that we're going. And they provide some advice and advisory to us. I've also worked really closely with EEA leadership to review the resolution and outline the actual steps of the implementation. We've created a meeting schedule for the task force, which sounds like an easy step, but there's a lot that goes into that. You'd be surprised. I sent a survey to teachers to get a baseline understanding of their thoughts and perspectives, just in general, to kind of find a baseline, I guess, where we are as a system with equitable grading. What I thought was really great is that teachers were asked just on the survey if they were interested in being part of this task force, and most of the folks that are on the task force signed up from the survey directly. I would say at least 75% of them did that. I worked.
Would you say it includes teachers who are skeptical, as well as teachers who are like already into reading, grading, driver equity, and things like that?
I would say that based on the conversation that we had at the first task force meeting, there absolutely are skeptical teachers on the task force. And I know them all now. I don't know well enough to say for sure when they were initially signing up, if they were skeptic right from the get-go or not. But the conversation definitely showed that there's a wide range of where people are and their overall support and understanding of this. But yeah, thanks for asking.
You have the full range. Is what
Wide range. Yeah, we've got it.
That's what we need?
We
That's
do.
what we need?
Yep, there's good conversations in there. After that initial sign up, we did notice that there were certain buildings and subject areas that had lower or no representation. So I worked really closely with our EEA leadership to try to identify people who could fill those voids. And you'll see in our roster here in a few slides that we still have buildings with low representation and some content areas that are represented better than others. But there, I will just say a lot of efforts were made to get that spread out. And I had to get used to getting rejected a lot. So along with EEA leadership, I drafted a plan to make sure we meet the requirements of the resolution by May. And then we did hold that first task force meeting on Tuesday, January 21st. And so these next slides get into more detail of this. And of course, if you have any questions about any of this, please speak up. So the first survey went out to principals. And I actually think I shared that with you all on a study session here, but I think some of the highlights from that survey are worth repeating. This first one especially is telling to me that 2/3 of the principals that we surveyed, and it literally was 67%, reported that grading practices were either very inconsistent or somewhat inconsistent within the buildings. Nearly 2/3 of the principals reported that students and families' understanding of grading were either not clear at all or somewhat unclear. And then slightly over half the principal surveys reported that grades reflect student mastery of standards to only a small extent. And so all of that feedback, spark concern.
Definitely could have been a part of our why. Right? If we trust our building leaders, it's certainly a part of our why as well.
Well, if anything, they might be hesitant to want to say things like that. So the fact that, they were either honest or it's worse even than they said.
Once the resolution was passed, I thought it was absolutely essential to form a partnership with EEA on this work in order to move it forward. So I had meetings with the EEA President, Andi Nofziger, and we brought the topic to the Professional Excellence Committee during the November, December, and January meetings. So they're well steeped in this at this point. Some of the things that PEC stressed was that they really thought it was important, and I agree, to have representation from each school and content area on the task force. They pointed out that it would be just essential to include the technology department to ensure that the systems that we have in place will align with any shifts that we want to make within the grading practices. This was an interesting one, and I thought it was good that they brought it up, but they really wanted the recognition that there are pockets where teachers have implemented equitable grading practices that exist within our system right now. And they just really wanted, I think, me and you all to understand that it is happening in some places. They wanted to ensure that methods that are used to help teachers buy in, for lack of a better word, to understand the reasoning why they should shift to their grading practices. And I think that really is just, they want this structured in a way that is going to help people arrive there on their own instead of it just being told to them, if that makes sense. And this one has come up now several times with them. They really want members on the task force sharing updates and progress with their colleagues throughout the entire process of this work. And so one thing that I've done, and I think I get to this at another point too, that after each meeting I'll give a slideshow with talking points to the task force members. And I've met with principals separately to ask for time, just a small amount of time really, but during staff meetings that they can share the slides, they can speak to the work that's being done there with the staff. And I've encouraged task force members and principals that if there are questions to write them on the parking lot and give them to me so that we can get those addressed as soon as possible. EEA leadership, Andi has collaborated on writing surveys, so the survey that went out to teachers was co-written by Andi and myself. So if you did read all the comments, you'd see some that were talking about how biased the survey was. It was a small number, but I think it's important for you all to know that was co-written with EEA leadership. And that was not, the intention was to keep it as unbiased as possible.
I think every survey I've ever been involved in, no matter how carefully it is, somebody thinks it finds one item that they sure is a biased item.
It was, a lot of time went into that and many others looked at it,
Yeah,
and that's
yeah.
not the intention. So I just want to be clear there. It was multiple people worked on it. Worked with EE on developing the schedule and planning the meeting agendas. And actually I'll have another meeting with Andi this week to finalize the details of the next agenda. So, scheduling the meetings was actually a little bit tricky, like I was saying before, because this is a large task force and it can be tricky to find a space large enough to hold all these people. So I initially just looked and saw when our large rooms were available, and it gave us a few dates. I sent a proposed schedule to EEA leadership, who gave some feedback on the most appropriate dates that were on the list. My initial schedule was a little bit too aggressive and had us starting a month earlier, so we started in January, which I think will be fine. We'll still have 5 meetings, and I just wanted to be responsive to what people were thinking. And that was a good idea because it gave me more time to make sure that all elements and content areas were represented, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. We wanted to make sure that we did meet at least monthly, that we had enough time during the meetings to have good conversations and collaboration among teachers and administrators, so that we can successfully move this forward. And so you can see the schedule that we have there. Once that was in place, I wanted the schedule in place first, before I surveyed the teachers, so I could let them know when all the dates were to drum up interest of them joining the task force. So secondary teachers were surveyed. The survey first went out in early December. We ended up with 196 respondents. 37.8% of those were middle school teachers and 65.8% were high school teachers. I sent the survey 3 times to try to get as many responses as possible. EEA leadership also sent reminders for staff to complete the survey. And that's just what we got. If you haven't had the opportunity yet, there is a fairly comprehensive report there of the survey results, but I've listed some of the highlights here.
What percent of the secondary teachers would 196 be?
196 is a little disappointing. I would say it's about a third.
About 520 secondary teachers.
120 total?
That's I'm trying to subtract ESAs.
So 40%-ish.
Do you think it was due to lack of interest? I mean, I would think something like this, which is a hot topic to teachers, if they think they're gonna be asked to change their grading practices, would have gotten, more response if they cared.
Hard for me to say exactly why they wouldn't, and it was, I really did make the effort to loop around and do this, get the messaging out multiple
Yeah, no,
times.
3 reminders.
I think teachers have a lot going on.
Yeah.
I think it could easily be a sort of thing like they get that email and they're like, oh, I'll do that this afternoon, and somebody comes in this
Right.
afternoon, that happens 3 times.
Was Andi surprised that it was a low response?
Both Andi and PEC and the task force, I think were surprised at the number of respondents. But I think it was, it would give us a representative sample. Obviously we'd hope for, I just did rough math, but we'd hope for more than 40-ish%, but there was a definite range of opinions on there still.
On the other hand, if there was a lot of negative reaction. You expect people who are really against something to respond to a survey and say, I'm really against this.
You would, right? I mean, on either side, if there's super strong feelings, you would expect a response. And we may have gotten that because there was that broad range of responses. I thought it was interesting that slightly over half the respondents reported to already using equal interval grading within their classroom. And I think it's important to note too that teachers were provided with a definition of equal interval grading on the survey itself. So they had that definition as they were taking the survey. About 70% of the respondents either strongly supported or somewhat supported transitioning to equal interval grading. Over 70% reported that grading practices were either very consistent or somewhat consistent within their department, which actually doesn't surprise me. And based on the conversation within the task force, I think that aligns really well with my overall vibe of the room. What I think is important to remember about that, there's two things. First of all, it does give me some hope that people are willing to be flexible and align if they're doing it within their own department already. Secondly, as good as that is, I think it's important to remember that if you're a kid, throughout the day, you're going to be graded by people representing 6 different departments.
And that kind of doesn't jive with the principals, although the principals were asked about inconsistency across the school.
Correct.
Yeah.
This may be kind of what Nancy just hit on, but that answer seems inconsistent with what Greg said earlier of looking at grade books and seeing a bunch of different ways of grading. So, I don't know what to say about that.
Well, but if it was a department at a school, he may only look at one
Yeah,
teacher.
I just looked across all high schools.
Within
Yeah,
the
so-
department. And to your point, I mean, that's a great number to know for what Jason just talked about. But a kid only takes math once a year, right? Hopefully. So that might mean your next child who comes in is going to have the same, you can't track that, right? As a parent, you've got, or as a child, a student, you have 6 different things. So from their perspective, there's no consistency, even if a department is being consistent. It would almost be better if we had like all 9th grade teachers agree to consistency across departments. Well, then the student is going to have a relatively common grading experience.
Right.
To Jason's point.
Well, in the definition of consistent, so they could think, well, we're consistent because we agreed that homework is 30% of the grade and tests are 40% of the grade, et cetera, right? But then within that, how do they grade the homework assignments? How do they grade? So they could come to agreement on that and think, well, we're consistent, but then I use a 0 to 100 point scale on this, or I come to that overall percentage piece very differently than the person next to me. So I could see that, unless on the survey it was more specific, but the question seemed like it was like this, and which you can't go deeper than that on a survey really to get at that. But I'm just wondering, is it a little high because they're defining consistency in sort of, macular way instead of.
Totally. Right, because they're probably not sitting there like looking at each other's grade books. And so even if they did agree on like what percent counts toward this or that or whatever, it could still be different with how they're setting that up. Or maybe one teacher puts all their grades in the Canvas and the other teacher puts all their grades in the cumulative, and that can get a little bit messy too.
But I don't want to lose the point that you said, Jason. This does mean that 70% of our respondents feel that they have to have some responsibility to be consistent in some way. Not 70% of teachers said it's a complete free-for-all and everybody does what they want. They have a sense that they're being, whatever you want to call, consistent. And I think that's overall a good mark.
No, it gives me some hope that we can move. I mean, it really does.
Well, and at 70%, the one above, fully above, that 70% of them support going to and we're using an equal interval grading scale. To me, that's very positive.
Yeah, and again, they had that definition, so they should have known what they were talking about when they said that.
Yeah.
And I shared all the open-ended responses with you, but I just tried to summarize again some of the highlights here. There were concerns expressed regarding the timing and the resources that would be required for shifting grading practices. The importance of keeping professional autonomy within grading, concerns of negatively impacting student motivation, that came up. There were positives too, just in general, the importance of equitable grading, the need for consistency system-wide was a common theme, and the need for clarity in what specific student output meets standard, which I also think is important. They're recognizing that the grades should be based on mastery of standards. So then, this kind of was happening simultaneously, but as the survey went out and people were responding to it, the final question asked if they were interested in being on the task force. And because I wanted to keep the survey anonymous, that original one, it actually linked to a separate form where they could fill out their name, their location, a quick question of why they're interested on being on the task force. We asked them the number of years that they taught and their content area. So, like I said earlier, and this was exciting to me, most of the folks who are on the task force elected to join without any further prompting. They just got that survey and they signed up. Worked closely with EEA to identify individuals to fill that roster, so we did have the representation across the district. And I am happy to say that we've got all the content areas represented in one way or another, although you'll see some are lighter. And the only school where we currently don't have a representative is e-learning. I am pestering them, trying to get somebody on board. So that's a work in progress, but as of today, I still don't have a rep from e-learning.
Were you able to put everybody on the task force who wanted to be on the task force?
Yeah, I didn't turn anyone away. So this outlines where we are right now, and these numbers, I just think it's important, are subject to change. There could be people who gain interest in this later, who sign up, or there could be people who end up with conflicts or whatever reason and decide to pull off. But as of today, this is where we are. We've got 41 teachers, 6 building administrators, 3 district administrators, and then you can see broken down by level, 17 are middle school teachers and 24 are high school teachers.
Who are the 3? You, Helen, and who is the 3rd district administrator?
Chris Bailey will be there for technology.
Perfect.
And he was not able to make it to the last meeting, but Sean Schaefer came to this.
I saw Shopper, okay.
And then, for the building administrators, how does that break down middle and high?
Oh, I'll have to think about that. We've got, I think it's 4 and 2.
4 high school.
4 high
2
school.
middle school?
Is there any sense on, like, how much agreement you would need to make a recommendation? 'Cause I don't know, I can get 52 people to agree on anything.
80%.
80%, so it's a pretty high bar.
It's high bar.
Okay.
And they settled on that by going through the required draft 5 process.
Okay.
And then I don't know if I need to read this full table to you, but if you want to take a minute to look at it, you can see how it's broken down by school and content area. While you're looking, if you do the math, you'll notice that it doesn't add up to 41, and that's because in some cases we've got teachers teaching multiple content areas or working in more than one field.
Interesting that they have the most math.
That's I was thinking the same thing too. It's like that.
My dad was a math
Doesn't
teacher,
surprise me at all,
and
yeah.
when I saw how many math teachers were interested in thinking about how he ran his class with his grading practices, it's like, this doesn't surprise me actually. Just continue. So From there, we put together, along with EEA, a draft, and I do want to be careful to say that it is a draft because it outlines the work from the beginning through May, and things could change as we move forward. But it outlines the general work of the task force. It explains the why, that grading practices are one of the most powerful ways that we communicate with students and families about their learning, that they should reflect on what students know and do, that they're fair, consistent, and equitable. It outlines the tasks and the meeting dates. And I did bring a hard copy of the plan if you all wanted to take a look at it today.
And also like we have, there was the electronic version links.
Yes, that's correct.
I couldn't get it to open on my iPad, but I can get it to open on my computer.
And when I was working on this plan, I really wanted it to be realistic, but also making sure that the work moves forward. We'll see in a bit that there are concerns about the timeline, but I think we've got to keep it moving. Even glaciers move forward. Work like this, we need to make sure that there is communication with the community. So we have a public-facing website. It's linked here on the slide. That I built along with Curtis's team that tells about the grading practice resolution, all the implementation plans. The plan is there. We've got the why behind the work, the overall goals. The meeting dates are listed. I have the rough agendas of each meeting as they're planned out on the plan that's in front of you. And then after each meeting, I'll post notes about what happened during the meetings.
Very similar to the way we cover the AIR meetings. You'll have, just be filling that in as they go.
Yep, and so you'll see a lot more for the way it's set up is that there's, I think it's called the accordion menu, but when you click on it, it expands. So if you click on January, you'll see a lot more there than for the federal rating that we subsequent. All right, so I'd like to walk us through that first task force meeting. So as I said, we met a couple weeks ago on January 21. I had tasked the task force with reading the documents and the survey results all prior to the meeting. But still, I think it was so important that everyone is very knowledgeable about what we're doing, the direction that we're going, that we did spend time during the meeting reviewing the resolution, the results of the grading practices survey, and the draft of the task force plan. But just to be clear, that meeting was not the first time they've seen those documents. We did take some time to crosswalk the resolution with the plan to ensure that there was alignment, and there was some discussion there. And then we began work on drafting the purpose of grading statement. I think it's just worth talking about the document review a little bit in more detail. So we did spend a good chunk of time processing these 3 documents. And while they were doing that, they really identified the concrete tasks and actions that were written within the resolution. I sort of guided them toward looking for trends and patterns within the survey data so that they could understand that baseline also. And then we spent, I think, pretty ample time reviewing actions and the timeline that are outlined within the plan itself, and had just some open discussion about thoughts there. And it'll come a little later, but there were concerns expressed verbally about the timeline and hitting those dates. But for now, I actually think we're in a good place to continue with that. And we'll keep moving forward this plan until we have to shift gears. So in addition to having just a verbal conversation with each other within the room, I also had, I mean, we could kind of call it a parking lot, it was a Google form, but they were giving some written feedback on this work. And there was a lot there, and there was a lot that was positive, and there was a lot that people had some concerns, and I think it's worth going over all of these. So on the positive side of things, there were a lot of comments that expressed the need to improve consistency of grading and removing subjectivity across our system. And I don't think you would find a person in the room who would stand up and say that they were opposed to that. I think where the challenge is going to be is to find a common ground where they want that to actually be. There were fewer of these comments, but still quite a number of them that just in general spoke to the importance of incorporating equitable grading. And then there were, again, these are listed in order, so not as many comments, but there was just some people who shared general enthusiasm and optimism toward this work, and that they thought it would improve the system for students. There were more comments that expressed concerns, and I'll get into how I'm going to address those a little bit later, but just, again, just reporting this. But the number one highest concern was the want for more time. And again, if we're going to put a positive spin on that, I suppose, I think that's telling us that they think the work's important and they want it done right. And so I think that's a good way, a positive way to look at it. But again, there was some concern about, I would say, the aggressiveness of how the plan is written from January to May.
Did it come through when they're talking about for more time, to think about it by each of the sort of the three big pieces of the resolution, meaning how much, because the time to get to standard really standard grading is but the other two, did they feel like that's more doable?
I think they do. I mean, some people were saying ridiculous amounts of time, but I think when they were making those comments, they were thinking pure standards-based, consistent rubric. That's going to take
really separating soft skills.
That's going to take longer than 5 months.
For sure.
it will.
That kind of,
Yeah.
In fact,
a whole bunch of us takes years, but.
I think the resolution reflects that.
Mhm.
That's our expectation is that will take longer.
Yeah, there was one person who stood up and said she wanted a 30-year timeline. Which
What?
Is
To her
that
credit, I
the
think she
day
was
she
joking.
retires?
Right, she figured it out.
But no, good. I'm glad.
It was a late night, I think.
It was. I don't think she was serious. And I think you saw this in some of the feedback elsewhere too, but there was a concern about the funding and resources that would be required to do this work. Some people were just in general concerned about the teacher buy-in or support, which again, I think with careful planning and the way that this rolled out, the way it is rolled out, we can get them on board, but I just think it has to be done carefully. This next one actually surprised me a little bit that it came up, and it was more or less based on one verbally spoken comment, and then it sort of showed up in the parking lot on the forum lot. But there was some concern that this improving grading practices wouldn't be the top thing that could also improve grad rates. And so once the comment was spoken, and that particular comment involved staffing, then those other ones that I listed there came up: attendance, class sizes, student preparedness, that people wrote on their on the Google form, thinking that those would be a larger impact to.
Which I think is almost word for word of what Andi said when she came to the board meeting.
Do we know, the impact of attendance? Do we have numbers on that? I mean, attendance on pass fail, I mean, to answer that.
We have, in one of our schools, we have inconsistent data to state that if you're at school most of the time, you're passing. We've had instances in one school, in one cohort, where kids were literally, I mean, they were there for most of the time, and they're still getting several Fs. And some kids were not there, but they're getting A's and B's. And so it's some inconsistent, a lot of, our principals are looking into what that is and why that's happening.
And I think that's one reason why getting that data to the extent that we can about the relationship, just looking at the relationship between grades and grad rates. But, I mean, there was one comment, you know, that I thought was so interesting where the teacher said, so you have a student who has poor attendance and they're kind of disruptive, but they ace the final. You can't give them an A. In fact, they would be fired in the real world. And I thought, well, if the kid knew enough of your subject to ace the final, why didn't you know that on a pre-assessment at the beginning of the year and give the kid different? So perhaps the disruptive behavior and the lack of attendance was the kid is bored in tears because the kid already knows all this stuff, but the teacher didn't find it out till the final. And in the real world, actually, if you could go in and solve the project and do it without any training, you'd be promoted. I mean, it was like, to me, it was so obvious that nobody talked to this kid to find out, right? That kind of thinking is what we have to help teachers understand, that, so she's gonna grade him down because she didn't like him. And, you know, yeah, I don't like a kid who doesn't attend and is disruptive. But if the kid knew the stuff, the kid knew the stuff. That kind of misalignment is very interesting. So when they bring in these other things, we start getting into all the complexities of teaching and learning that we as a board can't solve, but.
Well, there's a lot of that we can't solve. Staffing or attendance or class sizes or student preparedness. Those are things we cannot control. If we had the budget.
Well, if we had if we met the excellence, equity, and engagement pieces in every classroom, we'd have better attendance.
Oh, sure. Right.
So that, I do believe, can, do you know what I'm saying, as opposed to, yeah, class sizes right now without more money, we can't do that. You know, some of this, but anyway, sorry, I'm gonna try to keep us on time.
Well, there's connectedness here, there's relationships.
There's definite connectedness,
Yeah,
and so those things can't be ignored, that they're thinking all those other things are just as, and they are as important, but if they could understand how this particular piece impacts graduation rates, it would be really important.
Absolutely. And then the last one that came up the fewest, but I really appreciated that it was there, was that there were comments about the need for more student and family stakeholder involvement. And again, later I'll talk through some ideas I have for that. So our first major goal, which we started that day, was to initiate drafting of a purpose of grading statement, and really how that began was them thinking about, in general, what grading was for. And they were having a discussion, they were reporting that on large poster paper, and then after a good 10 or 15 minutes, I think, of processing within groups and writing down the purposes of grading, I was able to share with them 3 different purpose of grading statements from around the state, as well as some ideas from experts in the field about purposes of grading, and then asked if, after seeing those, if they wanted to add anything to their poster paper, which I think some did. And then they were able to see each other's. And I had my intention of starting with the purpose of grading statement, because I think that's a very intentional move to start there. Not only was it listed as a concrete task in the resolution, but also if we can have this, it will establish a shared vision for the work. It'll be that touchstone that we're going to be able to come back to through all of this. It'll clarify priorities for us, guide decision making. People will know what we're working for, so in that case, it'll build trust and buy-in amongst teachers, and then hopefully be the base, the foundation for a long-term framework that we can rest upon that. So I think it is the right place to start. My goal for, I'm getting ahead of myself, I guess, but my goal for the next meeting is, because it's really hard to sit and wordsmith a statement with a room of 50 plus people, I'll be bringing some ideas that we can take a look at and consider adopting as the purpose of grading statement for the district, and hopefully we'll be able to do that within the next meeting. And that, to your point, Director Smith, will be something that we need 80% consensus. So getting to the next steps. So I want to have answers to all the concerns, at least as best I can. So for the need for more time, we'll continue following the tentative schedule as it's written now. But as the meetings continue and work is done to help the participants understand each element of the resolution, I think we're going to gain a clearer picture of how long it's going to take to implement each piece within the system, and then after May have a broader, more extended plan of how long it may take to move towards standards-based grading, if that's the direction we end up going. To address the lack of funding and resources, I mean, it's essential, and we really do need to think about costs and what it will do to implement this, and it does need to be considered. But for this initial work, the work of this group right now, that really isn't the focus. And what I don't want to have happen is we start using that as a reason to not move the work forward. That would really help kids. To address the teacher buy-in, I absolutely am going to continue collaborating with EEA. They need to be on board. We'll continue with consistent communication with the building so that there's no surprises. Explain the rationale and the benefits of the change, and I think that will help increase our buy-in over time. The misalignment piece, like I mentioned earlier, I do want to bring the Fs and the NCs level, the failure rate levels to the next meeting, so they can see where our kids are as in their core classes. Just as a complete side note, of the kids in the class of 2024 who didn't graduate, 91% of those were credit deficient. So I mean that's an issue, and we need to bring that to the forefront and think through it.
Can we show data from other districts in terms of their failure rates?
We kind of worked on that a little bit, and it's a little bit hard to
Get at
it. What I will say, and the reason why I shared that data with you all earlier, is that our numbers are high. Our numbers are high. To address the need for more student and family stakeholder involvement, I wanted to get established first. I do not want to leave them out of this. They're a critical part of the conversation. But I wanted to get this group established. And then as the work moves forward, I'd like to bring in student and family representatives who can share their perspectives of what grading's like with that group, and can serve as like a panel before the task force, so the teachers are actually hearing what our students and families are experiencing when it comes to grading. So during the next meeting, I will share drafts of the purpose of grading statements, which will be collected from the information that they put on their poster paper. I'll be reviewing the F and NC. I said from nearby districts, I don't know if we're actually gonna be able to do that.
I think at a minimum, we'll be able to get them a range. So, you know, we surveyed 5 other districts, we might not be able to get all of them, and theirs range from X to Y. And so that they can see kind of where we might fit into that range. I think that might be a possibility, that Jason could say that. And to your point, to Jason's point, I mean, empirically, our numbers are not good. It actually doesn't really matter. I mean, how many others, it could show some disproportionality perhaps, but no matter how you look at that, 30% is not okay.
It's not. It's 1 out of 3 kids. I mean, you think about that. Think about it. This was an algebra 1 class.
I am intrigued, maybe I shouldn't say this here, but I am intrigued about, and I know we don't have time for a full-scale research project, but I do think it might be a little bit important, because Helen and I have looked at this a little bit, to show people, like, it is not the case that students who miss 80% of the time in class fail the class automatically, nor is it the case of kids who are there 90% of the time. It might be interesting if we could even do just like a kids who are there 80% of the time, what are their grades? Or whatever the average in our district is right now, 87% of the time. That might help, I don't know how much you can get down, but break down that barrier around, it's all about attendance. Certainly there's a relationship,
Yeah.
but it's not all about attendance.
Yeah.
Cause that's intuitively, when we were looking at those numbers, I was thinking, but you could show the data.
Well, also, when they talk about class size, isn't Algebra 1 of the subjects that we have the numbers?
Correct.
And they have the highest failure rate. That's, I'm sorry, just statement, period. I will.
Next meeting, I'd like to engage in some professional learning around equal interval grading. At the very least, at least have an understanding of the definition of what that really means. And Dr. Kadams will be coming to discuss the resolution and the improvement of bringing to the system, and then they'll have an opportunity to ask questions, which I think will be very helpful. I have this last bullet, partner with the technology department. I'm not sure if that will actually be part of the next meeting, but I want it to be consistently on our radar as we move this forward, because it is going to be just a critical component of this, and something I don't want to end up being a barrier. So I mean, the last thing we want to do is get far along in this work and then figure out that, like, oh, we can't do what we want to do with Canvas or whatever. So and if that comes up, we need to just work through solutions before it gets to that point. So that's where we are.
Jason, I think you're doing a great job. I think you're doing everything right. Every single thing you're doing right. You're taking it step by step. You're getting the involvement that you need. You're getting the input that you need. You have the right manner. You listen. Anyway, I think you've gotten this off to a great start.
I do.
Tom, do you want to weigh in on anything before we close?
Yes, I do also appreciate the work, and it's seems clear and easy to follow what the process is. I just want to share a concern that we have stakeholders, important stakeholders in their students and their families that are being brought in later in the process when things are more, when the process is further along. I'm worried about the impact that they can have at that point, or whether we're just asking, like, what there's, you know, the feeling that you can get when you're just like, there is a token, like, we knew we need student and family input, so we're just gonna ask you after we kind of decided what we're gonna do. Like, I'm not saying that's what we're doing, but that's my concern, is that our student and family input there's authentic, if we're actually gonna listen and be willing to change what the direction we started to go in if it's not acceptable to our representatives that participate.
I think we'll have to. I mean, we're not gonna be able to move this forward without the support of families and students, and we need to listen to what they have to say. It was a decision on my part to launch this work, as we didn't have a whole lot of time to get everyone together. Just building the task force as it was kind of pushed to the wire, and we started on the first meeting, with a representative from almost every school, but not all the schools. In working with EEA, it also was it just was clear that we needed to get a group together, and then we will be bringing in all stakeholders. But given the timeline and feelings of teachers based on the survey feedback and other aspects like that, I think this is the way to move forward, and families and students will be involved in the process, and we will pivot if we need to, based on the feedback that we're getting.
Director Gerard, I'd like to add, this is Helen.
Yes.
You can't see me. As we're doing this work with the task force, what we're doing in small groups with our high school leaders, at the end of this month at Mount Lake Terrace High School, and we can certainly do it more in our other sites, we are having a learning session where we're bringing in a student panel. So as this big group is working on this, we've got smaller groups of folks listening to students, and we have representatives on our secondary principals will take that information back to the bigger group. So it's not lost on us that, we don't have the voices early on, but we're trying our best with the timelines and all the things that we have to do. Make sure that we have small pockets of student voices elevated throughout the process, sprinkled in. Even though they may not show up at the February meeting, Dr. Keatings, when you're there, we will already have had a meeting with a student panel in one of our comprehensive high schools. And we'll share that information with Jason and the principals. Crosby is also on the task force, so he can share that. So there's some plans that we can do outside this meeting to bring in more student voices, and we can certainly do that with communities of families in particular high schools as well. So it's not lost on us, and it's not going to be the checkbox at the end, because if our families and students, we're doing this for them, and they need to understand why we're doing it in all the timelines. So please keep asking that question so that we can make sure that we incorporate those and elevate those voices as much as we can. But our first round of student panels is happening in a few weeks.
From my perspective, as a dad who's dealing with lots of different grading scales, and as a teacher who's had lots of conversations with multiple parents and parent conferences, I'm sure the feedback you would get was just please make it consistent so my kid knows what to expect. And from the student perspective, it's like, please just it would be so nice just to know that I can go from this class to this class to this class and know the grading scale is going to be the same, the approach to grading is going to be the same. I don't know how critical I guess, what kind of feedback are we looking for from the parents and students? Is it that we're looking for the need for it to be consistent? Are we looking for specific ideas of how grading practice should be implemented? Because I think that's more of a professional role.
Well, I think we need to fully understand the experience of our end user, and that's our students. And I think they'll have very similar narratives. I'm already hearing when I visit high schools, I don't know what to expect from teacher to teacher. The experience that you have just described is also, in a nutshell, probably the experience of many of our students. But we need to go beyond just that. I would like to know, and our principals would like to know, in which content areas is this a bigger issue than another content area? How many F grades are you getting compared to other classes? It could be that student, I'm passing all my other classes, but what's killing me is this one class. I got this one F. So those are the kinds of conversations that we want to have. And what happens when you get the F? Who's following up with you? Does anyone know why? We have one of our comprehensive high schools doing that work, pairing students with kids that got Fs and teams of adults in schools to check it out. We don't have that in every high school, but we have one that's starting, and we have pockets of that, I think. So we really do need to hear the whole story. And I'd like to understand what our families of color, families like mine, my parents who are not English speaking when I was going to high school, did not understand what to look for, what to ask, and so they didn't, what their experience is, and have some affinity groups as well to fully understand what would you like, what would be helpful, what would you like to know about your child's experience that you don't know. So there's different groups that we need to tap into, and that takes time, but we'll get it done. There's many ways. We have many ways of doing the family reach out and all of that, but we do have an expectation that when we're not doing our family surveys every 2 years, the off year, we must have family engagement sessions in every school in the district. And Dr. Sally Guzman went over that today. And so please know all of that, you could use those sources to talk about grading practices and not just the overall experience of what you're doing.
And Helen, you'll recall when you and I did the senior interviews.
Yes,
at
I recall
Riverdale,
that.
one of the things that came up from kids without being asked, and we might add a question on the senior interview.
It wasn't prompted, I know what you're talking
It
about.
wasn't prompted, but they said, and if you get a 0, then you just check out and stop going to class because you know you can't pass that class. We had a few of the kids from our group say that unsolicited. So it might be interesting to add a question on the senior interview this year explicitly about grading practices somehow.
And feedback.
And
We
feedback.
had 2 students who turned in the same assignment, similar task, but could not understand the differences and why they got certain points versus.
Yeah.
Remember that?
The extent to which you get feedback, the extent to which you're allowed to do revision. I have a quick question. Did the members of the task force get this book? The grading equity book?
No, they do not have that book.
Is there a way that we can buy that for them all?
I didn't budget it, but I could look into that.
Okay, maybe we could get a body deal or something, I don't know. I've been rereading it, I had skimmed it early on when we got it, and most of it, because I've studied this for so many years and done so many things, I think it's really well written, and I know it's a book that's being used by other teachers. By the pockets of teachers who are doing, I think Allison Larson talked about it, Edmonds Woodway, and then at Riverdale Middle, that this is a book that the teachers who are the ones who've been studying and doing it have been using as their resource. So it might be hopeful. It's a thick book.
I wouldn't recommend giving them a book, because
No,
they get,
they're not
they
gonna.
get books all the time thrown at them, they don't have enough time to go, like.
Okay,
read this book.
fair enough.
But I would, if you could go through and highlight certain places that we could just, highlight those pieces.
Absolutely, and I pulled information from that book when I shared, information with experts, and then when we do professional learning around like, equitable grading practices and equal integral grading, it'll come from, Feldman's work or Gusky.
Right.
So it'll be drawn from those professional sources.
And I may be pulling things as well for the 26th. And Tom, the rest of the board got this book, but I think it was after you got on, so maybe we can get a copy of this for Tom.
Only people who requested it got it. We did,
Oh.
we double checked, so if anybody still wants it and you don't have it, let us know, but we only got it for those who were interested.
Okay. All right. Any other comments or questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Special session of the Edmonds School District Board of Directors.
All right, team knows, 1-1 on the year. Lost one yesterday, 1-1 today. So I'm gonna need everybody to dig deep.